Okay, so Martin, you were the first one to send me questions, and they were very topical. Can you remember them? I mean, I can read them off my phone, but I don't know if you've got them on you.
I could pull them up elsewhere and read them out as well. But I suppose there are questions, but also sort of topics for discussion as well as much.
They were, yeah, no, they were good topics for this particular spring, I suppose. And for some reason, my share, I sometimes get this problem. It's only letting me share my own screen at the moment again, which is a problem. Which is annoying. So I'm afraid at the moment nobody else will share. Shall I read them off my phone, Martin?
Yeah, go for it.
Hang on a minute. I was going to put them on a PowerPoint. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of time to do that. That's my excuse. Bear with me while I find Martin's email. Right. Okay, so this is Martin's first question or point of discussion. Can you all hear me? Yeah?
Yes, yep.
With this current spell of terrible bee weather, it seems apparent that bees are more likely to create queen cells and get ready to swarm. Why? Is it so wet they can't go anywhere once ready? Are they just bored? Some of my bees seem totally uninterested in supers or syrup, still have room in the brood box, yet have surprised by creating queen cells. Should we modify our husbandry rules of thumb, depending on the weather? If so, how and what can we do? Now, yes, I mean, there are actually lots of questions there.
Yeah, there are a few.
I don't know if David want to pick some of those.
Is that all three rolled into one?
No, that's just the first one.
All right.
This could be part of the work session.
Can I answer then, please?
I'd love you to answer, David. Yes.
Okay. Right. Yes. Well, this year is an awful year. I don't know whether I've ever experienced one like it. We've had such, cold, dry April, followed now for the last fortnight of a cold, wet May. And basically, I think the bees are totally frustrated. Those colonies that built up strongly in April, and there were quite a few of them like that, just, thinking anthropomorphically, they just don't know what to do with themselves. They're very congested in the colony, frustrated we're not getting out. And it appears the only response they have is to make queen cells in the hope that probably they anticipate that should a bit more settled weather arrives, then a swarm can issue. Now, this may be a kind of a survival technique, which is hardwired in their brains, but we seem to be in uncharted territory at the moment because of the type of spring we've had. And my experience is that I've got a lot of colonies that built up well in early April, and then I've had to do a lot of either preemptive or reactive swarm control, and which is fine because I wanted to increase my numbers anyway. But I'm now having to turn around and supplementary feed some of these colonies. And what's remarkable is I put on supers in anticipation, and now I've basically been taking empty supers off again and putting feed into certain colonies. So I think what we're seeing is just an effect, and I classify as climate change, basically. We've got to remember that most of the bees' activity is hardwired. They've evolved certain behaviors over millions of years, and they can't necessarily think outside the box, I don't think. They have learned, they do learn things, but it's only for short-term responses. So your experiences, Martin, I would suggest are quite universal at the moment. That's all I can say about it. I don't know whether that gives you any answer or not, but you're not alone.
I was just going to chip in, David. I think, you know, if a colony is getting frustrated because it can't get out, possibly if it swarms, then it might swarm to somewhere better. Who knows?
Well, I think that's that's the evolutionary principle of it. It's like you know, you read in some of the old books about hunger swarms. Not that I've ever experienced a hunger swarm, but the suggestion was that in the past, the colonies on point of starvation, they would go. Now, whether that was absconding or true swarming, I don't know. I've never experienced a so-called hunger swarm, but I just suspect that this behavior we're witnessing is just innate behavior of the colonies in that they think, as far as they can think, which I don't think they do, you know, logically work it out. They just rely on basic survival patterns which have evolved over the millennia. It's just now, I think, possibly we're getting more of these extreme weather events being thrown at them than we ever used to. I certainly, as I say, I can't record a year like this since I started keeping bees, which is about 46 years ago. But all we can do is help them and hope that things will come right. But it is very disappointing. There's been so much forage out there and it's just going to waste.
Yep.
You know, you start to see petals being knocked off the apple blossom now. All the sycamore flowers are being wasted because of rain. They're very fragile and they get knocked to the ground. And, you know, so it goes on. But that's nature. That nature is very prolific in producing sources. And sometimes it comes right and sometimes it doesn't. And this year, as far as collecting nectar is concerned, it's not coming right at all.
Just to say, I think that, you know, typically for me, my colonies build up during the spring.
Yes.
Because I'm not so close to oilseed rape or anything. And then, so the colonies get big, and then in the summer, they go off and get bramble and rosemary willow herb. And of course, because it's a wet May, they often say that heather will be good, but my bees can reach the heather from here. You know, so I think what we should think about is this, is making sure that our colonies, they can't get out, so feed them. If they need feeding, feed them. And hopefully, I've noticed, looking forward on the weather, we've got some 2 days of sunshine coming up, or something, in beginning next week. And tomorrow is also meant to be nice. So hopefully the summer will turn around, you know, and the colonies will then be able to go out and get the forage. They'll also be swarming like mad, who knows. But I spoke to Peter Guthrie today because I went to get some syrup from him. And he is feeding his colonies. The colonies he's got on oilseed rape are giving him honey. He took suitors of honey off yesterday, but only from colonies that are feeding on oilseed rape. Now, when I speak to people, that the only people who are taking honey off are the ones where they've been feeding on oilseed rape. You know, anyone else isn't taking honey off. They're actually checking their bees because they're actually possibly starving, so they're feeding them. Anyway, he's feeding those bees that are collecting honey. He's got some fructose, some high, what do you call it?
High fructose fondant or this or something?
Yeah, high fructose fondant, which is it's softer. I think it doesn't take in. I mean, if you think about honey is fructose, glucose mainly. The fructose, if it's got more fructose, then it's less likely to granulate less quickly. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but fructose is less likely to take water in than glucose is or something. Anyway, so this is softer, and he's feeding it to them, and because it's like honey, they don't store it, so they're not contaminating the honey. Anyway, so that's what he said. But he's having to feed them because he's taking their store. But Roger Hearn, for example, lives in Broncos he's got fields of oilseed rape around him, so his bees there are getting a little bit of honey, not much, but he's got an apiary full, so he's having to feed them, you know, because they're simply not getting any forage. And Roger's sister Judith, we had a heavy downpour the other day. She got one of her big colonies swarmed just as the downpour came. Right? And you know, a downpour like that can destroy it. I mean, it could destroy it. But luckily, it landed quite close on the post, and she got it. But bees do silly things as well. You know, it was a nice sunny bit of weather, and then suddenly a big downpour, and the swarm just came out. And she watched it, but luckily she saw where it went. I mean, the bees are pretty desperate in many ways.
Yes, I would respond to what you said about Peter Guthrie. He's no doubt got his bees right on the edge of the oilseed rape, whereas my bees normally will fly 2 miles to get to oilseed rape, because none of my, well, one or two colonies are within a mile, but they don't seem to be bringing much oilseed rape in. It's just, once again, because of the poor weather, their flight distances are much shorter. I can see that Peter is okay, but only because the bees just literally come out the door and there's the oilseed rape in front of them. But they're certainly not flying very far,
No.
I don't think, at the moment. I've got one colony which has put on weight, which probably has got oilseed rape, and that probably is traveling about a mile. But that colony is probably the strongest colony I've got this year. And so maybe they've just got so many foragers that makes a difference. But I've only got, well, at the moment, I've got sort of this one colony out of, let's say, about a dozen capable of collecting forage that's actually got some weight in the supers. And that is 1 in 12. And the only explanation for that is that colony wintered very strongly and built up very quickly early in spring. And so I just think it's got loads of foragers. And the other key thing I've noticed is certain colonies are much more active than others. Like today, I just walked around my home apiary. There were 4 colonies there, and only about 1 was bothering to fly. The others couldn't be bothered. You know, and you think, well, there's great variation in the behavior of different strains of bees. Some will really get out there and, you know, despite the poor weather, and others just stay at home. And well, there we are. It's great variation.
But I think, Martin, that was your first question at the end of it. You say, should we change our husbandry? I don't think so. I think we should just read what the bees are telling us, and the weather and the situation, and carry on doing what we should be doing. And I mean, today I'm feeding bees today. You know, that's what I'm doing.
I suppose my point was I was struggling to know what to do. You know, I'd given them a super, they didn't take it. I put syrup on top, they didn't take it. They were on 7 frames of brood out of 11. It seemed like they had room. I didn't need to know what else to do for them, and yet suddenly they're queen cells.
Well, I suppose my reaction would be, if they're determined to make queen cells, go with it.
Yeah.
And basically split it.
Yeah.
You know, and try and rear a new queen with the queen cells. Never waste a queen cell. And
that's what I've done. Yeah.
Well, I think you've done the right thing. And if they're determined to make queen cells with only 7 frames of brood, then you've probably got plenty enough bees there to split it, because they want to go. And if you let them do what they want, then they'll swarm anyway, and you'll lose 50% of your flying bees. So you might as well do what I call reactive split, and probably share out the brood equally. And can you find the queen, by the way? Can you see her?
Well, yes, very much. So I was able to take the queen out with 2 frames of brood and a frame of stores, and I left her on the old site and then moved the rest of the brood box away. You know?
Yeah, okay. Well, that's right. That's fine. So then she'll receive all the flying bees.
Yeah.
So she'll build up her stock quite quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll stimulate her to come back into lay again. And the other one you'll have to watch, because they may need feeding.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah.
Well, I think you're on the right track. But personally, I think, you know, we can, all we can do is help them to our, you know, and in return use it to our advantage.
Yeah.
And there's no harm in producing extra colonies, because you can compare the performance of the daughter with the mother, And then if you've got too many colonies at the end of the season, you can start culling queens and reuniting. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a problem. You shouldn't worry about producing too many extra colonies, because at the end of the summer, you can drastically reduce your numbers if you feel you've got too many to go into the winter. Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to question 2 from Martin. It's coming up to 10 to 8. Another topic I've been contemplating is bee psychology. Whilst they wait for their new queen to emerge, settle in and mate, what is their priority list during this time? And what can we do to help them? Experience advises to leave them alone, and there is good reason for that, but is this an opportunity to make any changes? Can we make them happily busy with household chores and tasks?
I think you're starting to think too anthropomorphically here.
Maybe.
You've got to avoid, leaving too many queen cells so that they produce casts. Once it's a reactive swarm control, you've got to be very careful that if you leave more than one queen cell, it's quite likely the first virgin to hatch will go off in a cast. It's suggested by Wallis Shaw that casts are produced. It's supposed to be a survival strategy, but that's more in a situation where you haven't split your colony. But they do have this, do seem to have this preference to throw casts just for the fun of it, and casts are a waste of time. I mean, there's very few of them are viable because they're too small a number of bees, and you've got to get the virgin mated anyway. So they're very high risk, but it does happen in nature. So I think probably the rule of thumb is if you are doing a reactionary split like you've done, you've probably got to just leave one queen cell and hope that one hatches and produces you a new queen. Otherwise, if you leave more than one, there's a great risk that a cast could issue. Though technically, having said that, you've left the queen on the original stand with all the flying bees, so actually the swarm organizers should have gone back to live with the queen. So technically, there shouldn't be any swarm organizers with your split. So Wallis Shaw's theory is that you shouldn't get cast production, but I don't know. I don't rely on that particularly. I'd rather go down the route of just leaving one queen cell, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
Also, you're advised to leave them alone because you don't want to open up the colony just in case the virgin queen is going out on a mating flight or any kind of flight, an orientation or mating flight, and I think that's the main reason why you don't disturb them during
yes.
10-day 2-week period.
Yes, that's right. Unless you know the exact age of your queen cells, then it is dangerous to interfere. If you know the exact date that the virgin is hatching, it does seem to be quite safe to look at, even some people encourage you to spot virgins in your colonies for up to about 3 days after they hatch. It's not bad practice to be able to spot virgins. But after that point, as Chris says, there is a great risk that she might start taking orientation flights, and then shortly afterwards, she'll be going on a mating flights. Anytime after day 5 that she's born, she could go on a mating flight if the weather's conditions are right. So I think, the books advise you not to interfere, particularly if you, but for the reason for that is, unless you know for sure how old that virgin is when she was born.
But I suppose my question is also, what about the other bees? There's still loads of bees in that colony. What are they doing? What are they thinking? What's keeping them busy? It's those that I'm thinking of when I say, should I be feeding and encouraging them to draw out?
I think that if you give them the queen cell, if you've given, they've got a queen cell, and I've just created some nukes with queen cells, and those queen cells should have just emerged 2 days ago. What I notice, if you observe them, is that the bees will go out. They start working. They start going and getting pollen. They actively want to get out and get ready for when the queen does eventually start laying. So they do get busy, and I think having a queen, particularly a good laying queen, is all the bees really need to make them really busy.
Yeah, they seem to respond to they know whether they're queenless or whether the queen's hatched or not. They know. Though the newly hatched virgin is said not to produce all the queen pheromones until she gets mated, I think they're still aware of virgins present. So the virgins must produce some kind of pheromones, but they don't. Their pheromones don't. The queen substance doesn't kick in until after they've been mated.
I would say the other thing as well is with your split with the queen cell, make sure they haven't got the flying bees in your case. Make sure they've got enough food.
Yeah. Yes, I did say that. Yeah, that's okay. It's worth repeating, Chris. It's very important because all the flying bees are staying with the mother. And so that colony is not going to have any foragers for a week or two.
Yeah.
And it's high risk of running out of food.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else want to make any comments at this stage? Before I move on to Martin's third question. No? Martin's third question. Oh, sorry.
It's all a theme, right?
What was that?
All three questions have a theme running through them, right?
They do. You're right. So, what time is it? 5 to 8. We'll try and make this one 5 minutes, maybe. Yeah. So, if question 3 is, I would also expand question 2 into a wider discussion title. A busy bee is a happy bee, which we've been talking about in a way, I think. The more challenges we set our bees, the more aggressive we are with our husbandry, the busier they need to be and the happier they become. Discuss. Now, for me, a lot of it's about the queen, the quality of the queen. And if you have a good queen, those bees will be getting on with it and being busy. But I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. Nope.
Yeah, I just totally agree with you, really. I haven't got anything else to say. But I would suggest don't think too anthropomorphically about your bees. It's just that most of their behavior is on their hard drive, which they've evolved over millions of years. They're slow to react to changes that, well, particularly I think in climate changes that we're experiencing these days. But unfortunately, fortunately, only those that are able to adapt will thrive eventually. Okay.
Can I ask a question there?
Yes, certainly.
How long? I mean, queens used to. Are we leaving? Is the advice to leave the queen in the hive until the bees decide they need a new one, or should we be doing something? If you can see she's laying, but not amazingly, and there's no real reason for that you can see. Should we change them on a 2-yearly basis or something, or what do most people do?
I think there's great variation. Technically, yes, queens can last for up to 5 years, but they rarely do these days. I find that if I've got a queen going into her 3rd year, it's quite exceptional now. And I do sometimes try to hang on to queens into their 3rd year if I want to breed from them. But so often they let me down. I find that they get superseded. So often it's a race in the 3rd year, for me to breed from them before they typically, they supersede it rather than swarm. But I think it's just a sign of the times. If you're keeping bees commercially, generally commercial beekeepers only have 2 seasons out of their queens. and then they requeen, because the egg laying capacity decreases as they get older, and it's all about, they don't lay the eggs, you don't get the size of colonies. I think it all depends on what you want to get out of your bees, really. As a policy, I don't cull queens. The bees seem to make up their own minds about it. And I often find, as I say, they either desperately try to swarm in their second year, or even in their first year, and I can then rear daughters out of them and then choose which are the better, whether the daughter is better than mother or not. And then at the end of the season, I can decide which ones to cull. I think it just depends on how successful they are in mating and then coming into lay, really. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule about it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, does make sense.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, David. Thank you, Lynn. So if we go on to, I think the next question was from Francis. Where's Francis? There you are. Francis, you wanted to know about Top Bar Hive, didn't you?
Yes, yes. We just introduce ourselves. Peter and I, we've just moved into the area. We're living in Tredomen, and we used to keep bees before we came here, but we gave them away because we were moving. We want to start up again, but in the meantime, we've been offered a Top Bar hive and with bees. It's hopefully coming in sometime in August, and we just were hoping that maybe, you know, we'd find somebody who could give us some advice or information about share information about Top Bar hives.
Yes. Well, one of our members, Katrina Miralles, she keeps a mix of Top Bars and conventional national hives, and she seems to be quite content doing that. But it very much depends on what you want to get out of your bees, really. What I would say, I would give you my opinion about Top Bars, and I think I don't really think they're suitable for the Northern European climate. They're perfect for the tropics, and that's why the so-called Kenya Top Bar hive was created, and very much encouraged amongst bees abroad, etc., because it suits their conditions. Because what you're doing with the Top Bar hive, you're forcing your colony to live horizontally, and the natural method of life is really vertically. You know, in Northern Europe, they should be finding hollow tree trunks to live in. Unfortunately, a lot find themselves ending up in chimneys these days. But having said that, that really the Northern European honeybee is designed to live vertically. So immediately you put them in a Top Bar hive, you're forcing them to live what I call unnaturally. Because if their brood nest can only expand widthways, it gets much more difficult for the margins of the brood nest to be kept warm enough. And in my opinion, that does encourage them, whenever they get to a certain size, it does encourage them to go into swarm mode, because they reach a size when they feel they can't cope anymore, and their natural reaction then is to swarm. But the theory is that you have your brood nest, and then it spreads horizontally, and then you get your stores on the outside. And yes, you can go in, and when you've got comb fully mature and capped over, you can remove your comb and cut it out of your Top Bar, and then put your Top Bar back in, and away you go again, which sounds very exciting. But I don't think it just depends on what you want to do with your bees, really. if your colonies don't get too large, and you're able to produce a bit of surplus honey, which you can harvest and literally cut off the top bar and put it straight back again, and so it gives them plenty of room to store food. You know, maybe it can be a success. But the other downside is you can miss out on really understanding what's going on in the colony, because you can only do an examination really at certain temperatures. It's not a problem this year because we haven't got high temperatures, but you know, there's times if you have a hot summer, it's not safe to open up your top bar hive because the comb gets so soft. It's very easy for this comb to break off the top bars, and then, you know, if it drops down into the cavity, it can be a bit of a disaster. But I mean, I talk about this from my experience because I was a bee inspector, and occasionally we had to look at top bar hives for disease recognition. And as I say, we had to be very careful in choosing the right weather conditions to go in. And another disadvantage is technically, they're supposed, because you've got tapering walls, they're not supposed to join the comb to the side walls, but that doesn't always happen. But there are ways of getting around that, but it does mean you have to have special tools with you if you're going to lift the top bars out, and you have to inspect very carefully before you lift them out. You can even use something like a hacksaw blade to run down the outside of the comb to make sure it's not fixed to the side wall. But so, yeah, I think it's also something that we do have other members who possibly had several years experience and then just with conventional hives, and then they've decided, yes, we'll just have a top bar for a bit of fun. And that's okay, you know, but I don't want to be too negative about it, but I just want to explain to you the many disadvantages.
I think if we David, maybe if we ask Francis, did you have top bar hives before? Or is this the first time?
No, we had nationals before.
Okay.
And it's we had friends who had a top bar, and so, but we didn't really spend a lot of time, you know, with the top bar hive.
If you're keen to carry on the top bar, Katrina came to the last session, but she's not here tonight. She did say to me she's quite happy if anybody's interested in top bar hives, that she's quite happy for them to contact them if you would like to pursue that. But of course, Martin's waving his hand here. Martin Alderson. Martin, do you have top bars?
Well, David will tell you that he was one of the I was one of the first people he had to inspect when I had top bar hives. I started with this top bar hive, the Kenyan top bar hive. I then progressed to the Warri top bar hive from the French one, because of that made it vertical instead of horizontal, which I thought was possibly better. I'm in the rather cold position, so the Kenyan wasn't very successful. If they want a second Kenyan hive, I've got a spare one if anybody wants one. But it was it had its pros and cons, as you might say. That you could, but you know, obviously you can't put it into a spinner to get the honey out because you've got no frame at all. So it's only a crush and strain job. But there again, you could take it out one comb at a time, as and when you wanted it. So you know, this time of the year when you've got a bit of a spring flow on, you could get an odd frame from it just to keep you going. But I wouldn't advise it for anybody trying to do it on a semi-commercial scale at all.
you still have your worry hive?
Yes, I do have them. Funnily enough, I was not going to. I have nationals as well. I was not going to use the worry hives this year, but I have suddenly run out of a kit, and because there was no convention this year, I hadn't been able. I didn't buy any more spare kit this year, which was a bit of a shame. But so I've had to use a worry hive, well, basically last night, because I had a swarm and no kit. So I shoved them in the worry hive, and I put them in my new bee house, because I found a way of actually fitting the worry hives into one of the positions in the actual bee house. By adapting, slightly changing the base, because obviously you can't have a base up on long legs like you do normally, but you put the base on down to the level of the slots in the shed. But it was well, they're still there today, so they're doing all right.
Good.
So Martin, what's a bee house?
Oh well, it's a sort of bee shed. If you saw our last newsletter, you'll find it at the end of the newsletter. I think Rosewood is on there. With all the details, but
well, we'll enjoy reading that. We need to get hold of a copy of it, but we'll enjoy reading that and contemplating on David's and your experience with these alternative hives.
Well,
Thank you.
Given the choice, I should stick to the national, to be perfectly honest. You know, it's a way of keeping bees. I never have. Well, I've got 6 colonies now. I never wanted more than 8, and that was, you know, expecting to use, you know, the end of the season with perhaps a couple of nukes to carry over through the winter. The idea of the bee shed is because I'm in a very cold position on the north side of a hill, 1,000 foot up. It's easier to you know, keep the bees a little bit warmer in the coldest weather, you know, by having a shed round the hives, as you might say. Fortunately, most of my nationals are polys, so they've got double insulation now.
Thank you very much.
Best of it.
Yes, thank you, Martin. It's just as an aside. I mean, of course, I mean, if you've got a national or a British national, the boxes can get very heavy, and I know that there's now a long national you can get. Roger, who's just joined us here, Roger's sister now has what's called, I think it's called a long national, but I think she got that because she had difficulty with lifting full supers.
Yeah.
So I mean that's maybe something, I don't know what it is. I mean, if you're happy with nationals, I would say stay with the nationals.
Well, I built the kin to start with because I thought it would be easier for me, as I'm rather tall. Being over 6 foot, well, about 6'9" in height, means that it's a long way to bend down if they're down low. So the Kenyan being up on legs was quite useful. As it is, you know, I have in the bee shed. The bottom line is only 9 inches off the floor, but the top line is at waist level. So
Okay. I don't know, Martin, if Francis wanted to visit you, would that be an option? I don't know, to have a look at your bee house?
yes, and the Nationals,
Thank you very
and
much.
the Keenan and anything else.
Yes.
We
Well,
want to come and have a look.
thank you very
Please.
much. We'll have to get some names and addresses. Is there a sort of somewhere where I can look for these?
I can't remember what we put on the members part, David. Do we put all
Well,
members?
we should be able to forward, if there's winning, two people wish to, get together, there's no reason why we shan't share their contact details and then leave it up to them to contact each other, really.
Francis, yeah, what I'll do is I'll send you Martin's email.
Email would be
Okay.
easiest.
And I'll
Then
send
we
you
can-
Katrina, I'll send you Katrina's email as well, because
Yes.
Katrina's the one who looks after Top Bar Hives in Glazebury.
Okay, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I will
Yeah.
point out I'm quite a long way away. I'm in Prestine end of the world.
Well, that's all right. We'll enjoy the travel.
Prestine's a lovely town.
Hmm?
Prestine's a lovely place to go.
Well, yes.
Okay, so let's move on. So I think, Simon, you had a question you wanted to ask.
Hey, yes. So we started the season with a colony that we got from David last year.
Very quiet, Simon.
Oh, beg your pardon. Let me see if I can get closer.
Yeah, getting better. That's it.
Excellent. Okay.
Good.
So we started the season with a colony that we got from David last year. Started very well, and then got a lot of queen cells, and so did a reactive split, following Wally Shaw's guidance on the Snellgrove 2, which was very interesting. So we split the colony, took the queen to a new location just about 4 yards away from the original hive. All the flying bees went back to the original location where we put 3 frames of brood. Everything went absolutely swimmingly. The queen cells emerged in the original location with the brood that we'd left behind. And so following Wally Shaw's advice, we then destroyed those queen cells and transplanted the queen back to the original location. And we looked at them on Friday this week, and couldn't see any sign of the queen that we transplanted, and no sign of any eggs or anything in the hive that we took her back to. So now we have the split, which is forming its queen cells again, but no queen or eggs in the original location. I'm just wondering what we did wrong and what we can possibly do to recover the situation that we're in now.
I think, was this interval of 10 days between these movements?
It was, yeah. I think it was the 10 days dead, actually.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, it does sound as though, unfortunately, on reintroducing the queen to the original place, that they've rejected her and killed her. And so she didn't get a chance to lay any eggs. You say there's no eggs there at all. No queen. No. Okay. But you have got in the colony that you, on the second move that you've taken her from, you've now got. Have you got queen cells developing
yes,
there?
we have. We've got probably half a dozen, 7 or 8 queen cells.
Yeah. So well, then you're okay, because you have to take some of those frames with queen cells and put back into the the location on the original site.
Oh, okay. So
Because you've still got queen cells developing where the queen was recently, and you say the queen is gone after reintroducing her, that you can save the day. You can take a frame, just share out the queen cells if they're on more than one frame between the two sites.
okay.
And then that will, and these should be emergency queen cells rather than swarm cells.
Yes, they are.
So you don't need to thin them. I think now, because you've had this 10-day interval, the swarming impulse should have gone from the original site. So you basically make sure you distribute these queen cells and then just shut them up and leave them alone. And with a bit of luck, then you'll get new queens in both places. But make sure you've got enough bees in both places, and also you've got enough food in both places.
Well, both sides are absolutely swarming with bees. They're both loaded with bees.
Good. Okay. It should be okay. Yeah, it should be okay then. So you've had a setback, but it's not a complete disaster. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, so it doesn't look like Shane has been able to join us today. But anybody else got any questions? Want to say something? Want to talk about something? No? Everybody's happy?
Come on, there must be some more questions there somewhere.
Yes, Martin. You need to unmute yourself. You're muted.
Still muted.
So I have
I'm here now.
oh, hello.
The only thing I'd like to say, anybody know how to make sure one doesn't miss a queen cell, hence the swarm, please? I obviously missed it.
He's off the frame.
I wasn't hoping for a swarm at all.
Yes, it's no matter how experienced you are, it's surprising how good they are at concealing them if they want to. We haven't had, the thing is, we haven't had the weather good enough to shake the bees off the combs and have a really good look.
No.
So, you know, the weather's been against us really, and don't feel ashamed about missing a queen cell. It happens to the best of us, really.
Yeah. It was in a brood and a half colony, which was doing very well. It still is doing very well, actually. But you know, I looked at it on the Saturday, I think. You know, to try and check because it's doing very well. It was showing signs that it was getting a bit too big for its boots, and so you know, getting too active. And so I thought, well, I better have a check for swarm cells and such like. And obviously didn't see this one.
Was it on the bottom bars of the top box?
No, it was in the main brood box. The main brood box on the lower one. The
Right.
top. You know, I presume anyhow. Because I missed it. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, I just wondered if you've been in afterwards and looked for an empty queen cell.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No, I've been a bit busy today, hence I was a bit late joining the meeting.
Well, the weather's been pretty poor anyway. You know, it's been very difficult, really.
Yes.
It'll be easier with your bee house. I mean, I do find it is easier because you know, I'm in the dry at least. Well, so are the bees, aren't they?
Yeah, well, so they're ranging on top.
Yeah, yeah.
But I tend to try and do it when most of them are out foraging.
Yes, but that's been a rare occasion. You see, the last week or two, they just haven't been going out much. And I know your location as I've visited you, and you are up against it there, really.
Yeah.
On the north-facing slope there.
Mind you, I was under the sycamore tree this afternoon. There was a bit of sunshine that we had in between the showers, and and it was absolutely buzzing. The
Well, that's
whole
great news.
Giant sycamore was absolutely
great.
buzzing with them.
That's great. That's great news. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I think Richard Wilson, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I look at these and there's obviously genetic input from the queen and the drones, and I've got the two colonies that came through the winter aren't all that well behaved, and I had the advantage of getting hold of a new colony this spring, which is much better behaved, and I want to do some queen rearing from the new colony. But I'm just wondering whether it's okay to breed from that queen alongside the pre-existing hives and the drone would come from the hives, or if I should remove the hive different apiary where it would have its own genetic heritage from its own drones. Does that make sense?
Richard, you were breaking up a little bit there, but just to quickly summarise that. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've got an original colony and you've got a new colony, and this new colony of bees isn't particularly. They're quite aggressive, and you want to use them.
The new colony is good.
Okay.
The new colony is much better behaved.
So you want to
and I want to bring on queen. Yeah, I want to bring queens on from the new colony to re-queen my badly behaved old colonies.
Yes. Well, you are in a bit of a cleft stick there, because yes, while if you're breeding virgins from your new colony and they're in the vicinity of the other colonies with the bad-tempered ones, of course they're likely to mate with the drones from those other colonies. So it'd be difficult for you to make improvement. It's almost you require a separate mating apiary, really, away from this one with the troublesome.
I'll try and arrange for that. I will try and arrange to move that colony somewhere where it will be separate.
Yes, and it needs to be at least 3 miles away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay. Anybody else want to? Yes, Martin Burke.
Just a small question. In taking bees from a nuke and putting them into a full-size brood box, there's obviously the thought of giving them more space and giving them work to do in terms of drawing out foundation, etc., but keeping them warm because they're used to the nice snug little nuke. What is warmer? Putting them in the middle, surrounded by frames of stores, or putting them to one side of the brood box?
Putting them to one side is preferable, and then putting say frames of foundation up against that, and then your dummy board or whatever, and then for a while until the colony gets stronger, leave them to one side, and then you have to make your own judgment as to whether you've got plenty of bees, and then you can consider moving them to the middle. And also, hopefully when we get into June, we'll get more favourable weather. You need to take into consideration the time of year and so on and so forth. But I think it would be far safer if you kept them to one side initially and just added foundation up against the existing, up against the brood nest, and sort of get them to expand slowly from one side.
Okay. Yeah. Why?
Why? Because it's warmer. It's warmer that way. You say frames full of stores. Well, they're not necessarily warm. In fact, because they're more like full of, there's a lot of water in them, basically. And water conducts heat away. If it were empty drawn comb, that wouldn't be so bad, because that would be more insulating. But if you've got stores full of honey or nectar, as I say, a large proportion of that is liquid, and it will conduct the heat away much faster.
Okay, and I suppose similarly, if there's like a more south facing side to the brood box, put them on that side as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
you'll notice this sometimes you'll notice in the early spring.
Yeah.
If you look at your colonies, you'll find actually the brood nest is not central. It can be. I always say it's on the warm side. You'll find that they will always choose the warmest part of the hive, which is typically the south side or the west side. You can tell which is the warmer side of the hive when the colony isn't occupying the whole box. They decide themselves. That's just inherent behavior again.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Any more? Coming up to 8:30. Anybody else want to? Got something that that's on their mind?
Oh dear. Yes.
Yeah, something other than bees. I mean, no, not.
Well, can I just say that we've just had this circular to say that next Tuesday at 7 p.m, the Aberystwyth beekeepers are hosting a talk by Bob Smith. I know Bob very well. We went on to advanced bee husbandry courses together before he became an NDB and also after he became an NDB. And he's a lovely guy, and he just talks common sense, and he doesn't make it too complicated. And his topic is going to be basically managing Varroa without chemicals, which is something that I'm getting more and more interested in. And so I'm very much looking forward to that talk. And I would recommend everyone listens to that. The link is on our, everyone should have had an email about this from our secretary, and it certainly would be well worth listening to that. So that's next Tuesday at 7 p.m.
Yeah, it's also on the website, actually.
Okay, on the website as well. Yeah,
I put it onto our website.
Yeah, well worth. I'm sure it'll be well worth listening to.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming along. And
Yeah.
oh, hello, Simon. Did you want to ask another question, or are you waving goodbye?
No, I was waving goodbye.
Okay. Bye, Simon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
We'll have another one in the
Bye.
next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.